Hello, everyone. Thanks for showing up today for our webinar about streamlining your DNS management with DNSimple's Terraform integration. I appreciate you all taking the time to come out today and spend some time with us. Hopefully, you'll get some useful information about what we're going to share with you. Before I get started, I just want to give you a heads up that if you have any questions during the webinar recording, feel free to put them in the Q&A section, and we will get to answering those later on during the webinar. So now as I'm beginning, I'd like to introduce our guests. Our first guest is Adam Rowan, a former network engineer. He leads the technology alliances for HashiCorp's infrastructure product line. Adam, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And then we have Stephen Nelson. Stephen is an ops engineer on the platform team here at DNSimple and has been with DNSimple for almost 6 years now. Stephen has also been heavily involved in our Terraform work, both implementing Terraform for us internally as well as working on the Terraform provider. Thanks for taking the time today as well, Stephen.
Thanks.
A quick introduction about DNSimple. So DNSimple is an authoritative DNS provider and domain registrar really built for engineers. We've been in business now for 15 years, and this whole time we've been really focusing on making the DNS and domain registration product that you, as operators of the internet, would like to use. And that includes everything from how we design our user interfaces to our APIs and everything in between. We have a lot of different things that are really geared towards making your life easier. If you're not too aware about us yet, make sure to take a look. We'll provide more links later on, and we'll talk a bit more about some of the services we offer as we get through the webinar. And now I'd like to hand it over to Adam real quick to introduce a little bit about Terraform.
Thank you, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here. I've had the privilege and honor of working with Anthony and the folks at DNSimple for a few years now. Just want to give a big shout out to them for all the work that they do. They're a solid DNS provider and really can't recommend them enough. But let's talk about the importance of infrastructure as code and namely how HCP Terraform, which is our cloud managed version of Terraform, next slide, please, how it really acts as a golden workflow for managing your DNS infrastructure and all of your infrastructure, even outside of DNS resources that you might need. The goal that you're trying to get here with a product like HCP Terraform is getting to a standardized, immutable, yet shareable and collaborative workflow for all of your teams, no matter how far you're scaled out. So really what this does is it standardizes all of your Terraform workflows into one place, into a single service. So you have it through truly through a single pane of glass. Like I said, workspaces, you can create workspaces within HCP Terraform or Terraform Enterprise that allow you to segregate between different teams and environments depending on those needs, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. It also allows for a streamlined process of change management and approval, so you're not stepping on each other's toes, and I know Stephen is going to get to that a little bit later in his segment of the webinar and just how important that is. And finally, sometimes that can what can be sometimes a pain point for some operators and platform engineers is having to host their own version of Terraform, having the state file locally. With HCP Terraform, you don't need to do that anymore. The state file is maintained by HashiCorp up on our platform, so that removes that local execution and the problems that can sometimes arise therein.
Great, Adam. Thank you very much for that introduction. And then next, I'd like to hand it over to Stephen to talk a little bit about the importance of IAC for DNS.
Yeah, so infrastructure as code for DNS management brings automation, consistency, and scalability to a system that's otherwise prone to human error and can also be difficult to maintain manually. You can roll out DNS changes programmatically using Terraform. And so in short, infrastructure as code for DNS leads to fewer mistakes, faster changes, and better security for your team.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, let's go dive into the DNSimple Terraform provider then. First with a discussion about its features and capabilities again from Stephen.
So the DNSimple Terraform provider enables you to manage DNSimple resources using HashiCorp's Terraform. You can manage domains, DNS records, email forwarding, SSL certificates, and more. Next, I'll talk about some of the benefits of using the provider. The benefits of using the Terraform provider for DNS management are full automation of DNS management. You can automatically provision, update, and delete DNS records as part of your deployment pipelines. Everything is stored as code. So using Terraform's declarative language for resource management, you can define all of your resources and view them as code instead of through a web application. Yeah, so using the provider, I'll talk a bit about consistency. So this allows more visibility inside of your configurations. So your team will be able to kind of have a single source of truth for what things are deployed out in terms of DNS records, SSL certificates, which domains you have under management, and et cetera. So in terms of version control, you can link this up to a version control system. So you're able to effectively get more eyes on the changes that are coming through. You have point in time history rollbacks. So if you deploy changes out that may cause issues or lead to a downtime, you can easily roll back those changes and then apply them via Terraform. So that makes getting back to a working state a lot quicker in the event where there might be an issue with a deployment change. And then also talking about the scalability for teams and GitOps workflows. So using some of the features of Terraform, you can modularize workflows for specific domains or environments, and then lock those resources down to a specific team that's working on them. So it really lets you kind of grow out your infrastructure as your team size and organization grows, and then you can start to segment pieces of the infrastructure out to the specific team that's going to be working on it. Cool. So I'll talk a bit about our supported resources. So with the DNSimple Terraform provider, we have a few kind of broad umbrella categories. So the first one is domain. So underneath the domain umbrella, we have contacts, which is the registrant data required for domain registrations. We have domain delegation, which allows you to delegate your domain to another provider. This effectively is managing the NS records in the zone. And then we support management of domains and even registration of domains. So you can register and manage all of the TLDs supported by DNSimple. Next category we have is DNS. So under the DNS category, you can manage DNS records. So we manage all DNS record types, including DNSimple special record types such as alias and URL. We also have support for DS records, which allows the parent zones to verify the authenticity of the child zone. So if you're setting up DNSSEC on your zones, that's also automatable via Terraform. And next we have email forwarding. So DNSimple offers an email forwarding service that allows you to route email from a specific domain to another address. And we also have support for wildcard catch-all forwarding. So you can actually set up a wildcard that will forward all email incoming to that domain to another address, which makes it easy for your teams to be able to manage multiple domain properties without also having to configure separate email servers or configurations for each domain. And then finally, we have SSL certificates. So the DNSimple Terraform provider allows you to create Let's Encrypt certificate orders, so order new certificates. And then we use a backend DNS validation, and you can then pull down the data for the certificate once it's been issued. That includes things like the root server certificate, the private key, and the full certificate chain. So you'll have access to all of those attributes once the certificate has been issued. And you can then use those attributes to provision those certificates directly on your infrastructure with Terraform.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. Now we're going to move into the information about the provider configuration and the demonstration as well. So I think the easiest thing that I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make Stephen the presenter. which actually you should be able to do. You should go ahead and, yep, you're good to go, Stephen. I'll let you know when I see your screen up.
Okay, now I should have my window shared here with editor.
There we go. So it's all yours, Stephen.
Cool. So first up, we're going to go over the configuration and setup of the actual provider. So the setting up the provider requirements is kind of standard Terraform fare. So you define a Terraform block and your required providers. In this case, we're showing that we're requiring the DNSimple provider, and we've also got the version pinned to 1.8.0, which is the latest released version. We do recommend pinning versions because if there are changes that occur between the versions, you'll want to check the documentation and make sure you're handling any specific cases where a resource may have changed, and you want to be able to import or update the data before running the apply in those specific cases. So once the provider has been required, you need to configure it. So for the DNSimple provider, the only two items that are required are your account ID and then an API token to access DNSimple. Inside of the provider configuration, you can also configure sandbox. So you could put a flag in here that's sandbox set to true. And that would point all of this at our sandbox environment, which allows you to test most of the features of DNSimple in our sandbox environment without impacting your production workloads. So once you have the provider set up, this initial setup defined, you can run Terraform init, and that will download the provider plugin and get everything set up. So you can see here in the output that we've got version 1.8.0 was installed. So next I'll move through some more of the resources that we're going to be managing. So the first resource here is a DNSimple contact, and that is effectively the registrant information that is attached to a domain registration. So if you're registering domains through DNSimple, you can manage the registrant data through the DNSimple contact resource. And this provides everything that is required to register a domain. There's also some additional fields which are optional. And the cool thing about using the Terraform provider extension in VS Code is if you hover over each one of these options, you can get what the expected types are and also whether they're required or optional here. So that's pretty cool. So that's a contact. Next up, we're going to take a look at a DNSimple registered domain. So this is a domain which we currently have registered in our account. And you set basically the contact ID. So here we're referencing the DNSimple contact resource that was created above and pulling the ID directly from that resource. And then you can also attach things like auto renewal, whether you want to enable DNSSEC, if you have transfer lock enabled, and then you can also enable who has privacy for a domain as well. So I'm going to stop there at those first two resources, and we're going to go ahead, because those already exist in the account, I'm going to run a couple commands to import them into my local configuration. So here I'll run Terraform import, and then the name of the resource, the name of the actual resource name, and then the contact accepts the ID of the object. So you can find that in the DNSimple web application or via the API. So if I go ahead and run that, it's going to import the contact we're going to use. And then, as I mentioned, we already have this domain registered as well. So I'm going to go ahead and run a similar command pointed at the domain registered domain resource. And this one accepts the name of the domain. So I'll pass in the domain, and that will go ahead and import that. So now we've got a contact and a registered domain, which are the registered domain is using the contact that we have defined in Terraform. And we'll move ahead to some more resources here. So first up, we've got a couple of zone records. So DNSimple zone record allows you to provision DNS records inside of your zone. This supports all standard DNS record types, including special types specific to DNSimple, such as alias and URL records. So in the first example, we've got the zone record. This is going to be provisioning a record at the apex or the root of the domain. We reference the registered domain resource by name. And then in the name of the record, we leave that blank because we intend to have that at the apex of the domain. In this case, we've defined the type as A, the value is an IPv4 address, 1.2.3.4, and then you can also configure the TTL. And then we have another example of a zone record here. This one is actually using a DNSimple specific record type, the URL record, which allows you to redirect your domain or subdomains to another web property. So in this case, we're taking example.the-domain we're managing, cooperativeappeal.work, and we're using a URL redirect record to point that to dnsimple.com. Here we've got the TTL value set a bit lower. So next up, we've got the DNSimple email forward resource. So as I mentioned earlier, you can use that to forward emails for domain to another email address. In this case, the example here is for the wildcard catch-all. So any email coming into this domain name for any name email address would then be forwarded to this address that we have configured here. And then finally, we've got some examples of an SSL certificate full chain workflow. So in this case, the first resource, the DNSimple Let's Encrypt certificate, is creating a certificate order at Let's Encrypt. And then that order will take some time to process and become issued. Once the certificate has been issued, you can use the data source in Terraform for DNSimple certificate to then pull down that issued certificate's attributes, which include things like the root certificate, the full certificate chain, and the private key. And then finally, I've got an output block here to take some data from that DNSimple certificate and print it out. So now that we've got Terraform initialized, we've imported both of our existing resources. We now have that imported domain with an empty zone. Effectively, the only thing that exists in there are the NS records currently, delegating it to DNSimple DNS servers. So we can go ahead and run Terraform plan. And that's going to give us the output of the remaining resources that we just went over. So you'll see here that we've got the certificate order or the certificate data that's going to be updated once this new certificate has been issued. The DNSimple contact was imported, but there are some additional attributes that are specific to Terraform, which aren't going to be updated until we run Terraform apply. So you'll see here that a couple of these things will say known after apply. And then next up, we've got the email forward. This is creating an entirely new resource. So you can see all of the options that will be set after we run apply. And then we have the Let's Encrypt certificate order. Again, once we run this, it will update everything once we've applied it. And then we've got our zone records that we went over. So all of that looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and run Terraform apply. We'll get the similar plan output, which should match what we just reviewed. And we can pass in the confirmation here that everything looks good. And this is going to go ahead and start creating all of those resources for us. You'll see here that on the data for the DNSimple certificate, we're actually waiting to read the data. So in this case, what's going on behind the scenes is that the DNSimple Let's Encrypt certificate resource has created an order at Let's Encrypt using DNS validation method, which requires us to configure a DNS record that validates ownership of the domain. We take care of all of that behind the scenes at DNSimple. So that record has been created. We're now ready to validate. And what we're waiting on now is Let's Encrypt to validate that that record has been distributed out and that it exists. Once it goes through, then we should see the data output for the certificate once it has been issued. In most cases, Let's Encrypt certificates take roughly about 3 minutes to provision.
I saw you provisioned a single host name certificate. Can you also support wildcard certificates and multi-host name certificates?
Absolutely. So inside of the certificate order, you can replace the name example with a stars for the wildcard. And then if you want to do a multi-name, so you could actually leave this as example. And there's another option that you can add here to this resource block, which is alternate names. So you can attach additional single host names or subdomains to that certificate order as well. So if you want to manage all subdomains via wildcard, or you just have specific names that you want to be able to provision the certificate for, we support all of the above.
That's excellent. And what about on the DNS side? Can I use wildcards, for example, on the DNS side as well if I want to say, let's a wildcard under a subdomain?
Yeah, I think we support that for certain record types.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
quick note about this too is there's a few resources that are, as I just mentioned, doing asynchronous processes behind the scenes to validate things. So another one would be a domain registration. If you actually register a new domain, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. So we actually have a timeout set up for that resource as well. And you would see some similar output to this, where it's waiting for the domain registration to go through before providing all of the attributes.
And I see you have an auto renew true flag on the Let's Encrypt certificate. What does that do?
So auto renew flag with DNSimple allows you to automatically renew your Let's Encrypt certificates before the 90-day expiration date. So if you have that enabled, we will some point after 60 days, we'll start to attempt to renew the certificate. And then you would be issued a new certificate with the same names when that renewal goes through. And we also have some services such as like webhooks. So if you want to be notified when a new certificate is issued, you can set that up and that will pass data about the certificate that's been issued as a renewal.
Awesome.
Cool. So that went through almost 3 minutes, a little under 3 minutes. So we've got the apply is completed. We see that we've added 4 new resources. One has been changed, which are the local attributes for the contact. And then for the output, we can see the root certificate for the Let's Encrypt certificate that's been issued.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that demo. I'm going to go ahead and take back over here and put the slides back up. You should see the slides now. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about here are some best practices and tips, and we're going to look at it both from Terraform in general, as well as around DNS specifically. So first, I'd love to talk about version control. So in general, Adam, with Terraform and HTTP Terraform, do you have any particular best practices and tips around version control?
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the great things about HTTP Terraform and Terraform Enterprise is to use those vital integrations like Stephen showed us. It's very important to integrate with your VCS tool of choice, whether that's GitHub, GitLab, or something else. Use that team collaborative power so that everyone can have more eyes on your PRs before they're passed through. You can really integrate Terraform into a CI/CD pipeline that way. It really helps shift left in your thinking and your practice, and it really helps streamline all of that. So really implement that integration in HTTP Terraform or Terraform Enterprise. I can't stress that enough.
And Stephen, what about on the DNS side in terms of version control around the DNS configurations? Anything in particular that's a best practice or tip that you have there?
Yeah, so I mean, just storing these in Terraform is a big win because you get more visibility on the changes and things to your DNS environments. So version control for DNS allows for an easy mechanism to review and approve your changes. And you can effectively build that process around standardized processes defined for your team or organization. And you also have a historical point in time reference for DNS configurations. So you can look back and see on this specific date, what was the code base looking like? What were the records we had provisioned and what SSL certificates were active and things like that.
So speaking of team collaboration, any tips around team collaboration, Adam, with respect to Terraform?
Absolutely. Once you have HTTP Terraform or Terraform Enterprise integrated with your VCS tool of choice, you can take advantage of all of those options that Stephen just talked about. Additionally, when you set up workspaces and segregate your team's control, you might have front-end apps, you might have back-end apps, databases, things like that all need DNS records, whether they're internet facing or just internal to your company. And that really unlocks a lot of useful tools, especially for very scaled out teams, because then, like Stephen alluded to, you're not stepping on each other's toes. You're not, I mean, we all know the IT and network jokes, it's always DNS. This helps you eliminate that. This helps you, take the human element, which is most often error, out of the equation, and you have a streamlined, immutable workflow.
All right, great. And Stephen, any particular tips or tricks around team collaboration, specifically with respect to DNS and Terraform or DNS as a whole?
Yeah, so I'll just echo what Adam said, and GitOps or version control workflows can ensure that you have approvals and extra sets of eyes on things with like your DNS configurations and domain management before you merge changes to them. And also, we implement an output. So in our version control system, when our CI runs the Terraform plan before anything's been merged, we actually post that back into the GitHub pull requests. So anyone reviewing it can see the plan output and right inside of GitHub.
Very cool. All right. And then the final item, Stephen, back to you again, is around stability and consistency. Any recommendations or best practices around DNS stability and consistency?
Yeah, so by using Terraform and the DNSimple provider, every domain, DNS record, email forward, SSL certificate that you manage becomes a line in code. You can use Terraform workspaces to separate configurations by environment, and you can use Terraform modules to reuse DNS setups across domains or teams. So this helps to keep your code dry and make your updates more consistent.
How about from you, Adam? Anything in particular about HCP Terraform around stability and consistency you want to call out?
Perfect segue, Stephen. Really appreciate you calling out modules there. I mean, no one likes to do the same thing over and over again. If someone's written good code, a good module, why repeat the work? Why reinvent the wheel? In ACP Terraform and Terraform Enterprise, you have the concept of a private module registry. So someone publishes a really great module for deploying A records or whatever the case may be across your estate. You can maintain that in that private module registry and use it over and over again and just keep making improvements on the same. So leads directly to stability and consistency.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So our next section here is going to be the Q&A session. I have a few questions from the audience that I'd like to go through. And I will indicate who should answer this. I think, Stephen, a lot of these are going to be related to questions people have around certificates. So let me get the first one here. So this is a question about certificate handling. How is it possible to get the ID of the most recent certificate for a given domain?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we currently have a webhooks notification system set up that you can configure in DNSimple. And this would give you a notification with some data about the certificate, including the ID that's been issued as a renewal. So you could configure a workflow that effectively pulls down that data from the webhook notification and then opens a PR to update the ID. You can also get the ID using our API directly. So if you're importing a resource that already exists and you need to pass in the ID, you can do that as well by looking up the certificates and then using a filter mechanism to see which certificates have not passed the expiration date yet to find the active one in your account.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that a domain can have multiple certificates. So you have to also determine which subdomains you're looking at here and also consider alternate names as well that might be involved in that. But it's good to see that you have both a push mechanism with webhooks or a pull mechanism with the API. The next question is about resources that live longer than 90 days, and they'd like to install the renewed certificate by just reapplying the config in Terraform Cloud. Is that something we support today?
So that's not something we currently support. You do need the reference to the certificate. So in this case, the ID. As we just mentioned, there is a way to implement that via workflows, either using the push or pull mechanisms. But it is also something that has been requested. So we are taking a look at the potential for implementing that into our Terraform provider in the future.
Yeah, and I just love to note to everybody that we're always looking for suggestions and feedback about how we can improve pretty much anything that we do around DNS and domains. And the Terraform provider is one of those areas that you can have an impact. If there's something you need, please make sure to reach out to support@dnsimple.com. We'll show that email address later, but we'd love to hear it if there's something you really think is a good workflow in Terraform that around DNS that we're not supporting yet. All right, so the next question that I have is, so for SSL certs, does this eliminate the validation of email requirement? Stephen, this is you.
Yeah, in the case of the Let's Encrypt certificate, it absolutely does. So we use DNS validation method for all Let's Encrypt certificate orders. If you're ordering a standard Sectigo certificate, that is not something we currently support. That does require email validation, but we are looking at implementing DNS validation for standard certificates as well in the future.
Yeah, and I can tell you I have a little bit of inside knowledge that this topic has been one that's come up directly inside of our product development team recently. So it's looking like something we might put in the queue very soon. So keep an eye out for that. The next question I have is, so what are the common challenges with managing DNS environments in general, Stephen, or through Terraform specifically?
Yeah, so I would say the most common challenges is effectively looking at all of the compliance around the RFC docs and what can be configured in a zone, what collides with each other. So anyone who's taken a look at the RFC docs for DNS knows what I'm talking about. There are a lot of gotchas in there, and generally speaking, our API points you in the correct direction if you have an invalid configuration. So if you go to apply a Terraform plan, and part of that plan includes invalid configurations. So for example, you have a CNAME record at test.example.com. You can't configure any other record types other than specific ones for DNSSEC using that same name. So if you already have that CNAME record in place and you want to provision another A record using the same name, you would likely get an error back from our API stating specifically that you cannot configure another record type using the same name as an existing CNAME record. There's a lot of cases like that, and I think generally our API is really good at pointing those out when you run into them.
Awesome, thank you. And then the final question that I have here is, you mentioned the DNSimple sandbox for testing things. Is there any limitations that folks should be aware about if they use the sandbox?
So the sandbox environment, you can configure, register, provision domains, DNS, and everything just like you would in production. The caveat being that there is no actual public DNS service. So you would not be able to query those records from a public resolver. As a result of that, you can also not issue Let's Encrypt certificates because we use DNS validation, and Let's Encrypt is looking at some public resolvers to see if those records exist. So there are a few things there. In addition to that, you can configure an email forward, but it won't actually operate in the sandbox environment. You would just be able to validate that all of the associated records were created along with that, and then the actual email forward was created. But because there's no DNS record or DNS resolution attached to those MX records, the email forward there would not function.
Excellent, thank you. All right, well, so in conclusion, I just want to recap some of the key benefits that we talked about here real quick. So in terms of benefits, you have the ability to have a more stable system with collaboration amongst teams, using both Terraform as sort of a way to define a clear plan for what your systems are going to look like, as well as version control to control the history of that. And also you can build workflows essentially around that version control to ensure that the changes that go out have been properly reviewed and vetted before they go out. Are there any other key benefits that you want to recap, Stephen, that we should cover here?
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah, bringing more visibility to your teams, having a review process, actually setting up processes that allow you to have visibility into what's going on inside of your DNS zones and domain management.
Awesome. And just I want to point out again that essentially when you go down this path and you start using Terraform to manage DNS and domains, DNS and domains becomes part of the rest of your infrastructure. It gets treated just like the rest of your infrastructure as code, which has the nice benefits that you get from all the other elements of your infrastructure being as code as well. So resources for further learning. First, I want to hand over to Adam to give a few resources from the HashiCorp side.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. We have a couple of websites up here. If you'd like to try HCP Terraform, absolutely free, an account that never expires, comes with, I believe, $50 in credits out of the box. Please go to cloud.hashicorp.com, sign up for a free HCP Terraform account, and you could get started using workspaces, using the private module registry. You can even use, run tests and get all your DNSimple modules in there. As Anthony's posted here, for all Terraform documentation, please go to developer.hashicorp.com/Terraform. You can find lots of tutorials there on how to implement infrastructure as code into your workflows. And then if you're interested in going further or have any questions whatsoever, you can reach out to sales@hashicorp.com or support@hashicorp.com.
Awesome, thank you. And Stephen, for the technical side of DNSimple, do you have any? Here's some URLs and emails you'd like to share.
Yeah, so you can always go check out developer.dnsimple.com for information about the Terraform provider, links to the provider documentation, as well as some examples and documentation around all of the other language SDKs that we offer. So maybe you've got automation tools that work alongside Terraform. We have a lot of SDKs that can be utilized to facilitate those workflows. And then also on our DNSimple GitHub organization, we have a DNSimple API examples repo, and that contains a lot of examples for using software SDKs as well as the Terraform provider.
Awesome.
And if you have any questions, yeah, I guess you can reach out to support at DNSimple.com, and we'll be happy to take a look at any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then if you want to see examples of other customers that have already used DNSimple and Terraform together to automate their management of their domains in DNS, go ahead and visit dnsimple.com/customers. We have several use cases up there that are very specific to Terraform and DNSimple, as well as other use cases. And then finally, if you're interested in finding out more about our enterprise offerings, you can reach out to sales@dnsimple.com and schedule a time to speak with one of our folks about what options you have there. Thank you both to Adam and Stephen for coming out today. Thank you to our audience for coming out today as well. We appreciate that you've taken the time to spend 30 minutes or so with us here today. If you have any further questions, you know how to get in touch with us, and I wish you all an excellent day. Thank you both. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.